I can't do this character anymore. This version of me that I've built isn't
Yeah.
working. I'm suffering on such a daily level. I'm not enjoying my life, and I've just nearly killed my family.
Mm.
And I felt the guilt and shame, and I just made a decision there and then to make a change. And I quit drinking there and then on the spot. It's like this sort of
Oh,
moment of clarity. And, that was the segue. Yeah, I was around 35 into movement, into health, to occupy my time, get healthy. And I just craved any modality that would help me suffer less, get healthy. And that was the big shift out. And my marriage ended after that. And I shifted into kind of the health journey from there.
mm. Sounds really like your life hit some kind of bottleneck where all this stuff that
Absolutely.
was building prior just kind of got stuck and there was only one way for it to go. I'm really interested. Something that strikes me is that from what I hear, it was almost like you hit a certain type of rock bottom, or you hit a certain type of place where you were like, I can't go any further. I have to do something. And at that point, I think it's quite a binary in life. It's either you hide away from it, or you have to take action and go in a different direction. And I feel like it's almost like a rebound where you just went, boom, something different completely. Did you feel a certain sense of fear to start something new, or were you so like back against the wall? You were just like, you went more instinctual, like animalistic almost, like let's go.
Yeah, I think something that stood out was I remember talking to a friend. This was before that moment about death and how she was really afraid of death and afraid of dying. And it wasn't that I was suicidal in that moment, but I remember having this feeling of just a complete indifference to death. And it was almost like that scene in Fight Club where he fantasized about being on the plane and the cabin just tears open and he just gets sucked out into the night, and how much of a relief that would be. That it's not that you're suicidal and you're going to bring about your own death, but having that conversation made me realize that, like, well, if I died on the way home today in some sort of natural way, it'd be a relief to me. And
Uh,
then that reflects to you that your life sucks. Like, you're not enjoying your life if that's how you feel. So, and it's not in a good, I try to justify that as, oh, well, I've reached some sort of Zen enlightenment then because I don't care if I die. But it's more
uh,
because you're so miserable, not the other way around, that, oh, you've reached this enlightened state where you're at one with all divinity and just ready to melt back into the greater consciousness. It was more,
uh, uh,
man, I'm so miserable that I actually don't mind if this ride ends.
yeah,
So that
yeah,
was quite frightening, to realize that
uh,
you're at that point. So for me, it just felt more like, well, if I don't change something, I just kind of know that I'm going to resign myself to life sucking and just it being fairly vacuous and empty. And it's
uh,
not nourishing on an energetic soul level, even though the money's rolling in. I can buy a lot of stuff. Um, Outwardly, I'm getting the societal approval. Um, my parents can brag about me at barbecues, and that's all going very well. I've got respect. I've got a few letters behind my name. I've got a business card. I walk around town in a suit and tie, and people um, see me as a prominent person of the community. Yet I'm completely hollow inside,
uh,
and this doesn't feel good. So if I don't make a change, I just feel like I'm the Walking Dead here. I'm a zombie, and do I want to? Is that how I want to live, or is there something else? So I
uh,
was prepared to roll the dice and take a chance on something else.
how hard was it to give up that persona, the persona of the guy with huge respect that your parents could brag about?
It was it's taken a few years for me to stop introducing myself as, hey, I'm Aaron. I teach handstands and movement, and but I used to be a lawyer, so I used to be I used to be this guy who had this position and I've got a degree, and it took a few years for me to stop doing that, just to go, hey, I'm Aaron, I teach movement, and that's it. I don't need to back it up. I don't need to prove anything to anybody. So it's been an unwinding of my ego, because I think I just felt like I was stepping down or something at first. My ego was like, oh, what are you doing? Like, you're going backwards. But really, I don't know. On an energetic level, it's been so much more fulfilling on a soul level. So I try to not see it as a linear thing. I'm much more aware of the subtle body, the energetics of it, as opposed to just what's on paper and the obvious external visual objective factors. It's yeah, there's much more about how do I feel on a daily basis. It's become important.
Yeah. I really think that this is hitting the crux of this kind of whole topic of there's a subjective emotional content to everything that we have, but there's some kind of weird dissonance to the objective, judgeable or measurable risk therein. And from the outside, nobody would have said that your life was at risk of change or being a problem when you were the lawyer. Because from the outside, all of the risk was like, oh no, it's amazing, he's doing so good. But then the emotional content, that kind of stress that you were living through, was obviously horrendous. I wonder, you mentioned before that movement has been a really great tool for you to kind of heal and move forward. I wonder, in the early days when you first started to transition and move away from your previous life, what kinds of movement modalities were you using to help yourself?
So initially, I really needed to distract myself from wanting to drink liquor. So I put in a lot of work early with handstands, rings, calisthenics, mobility training, locomotion. I was really drawn to the works of Ido Portal, generalist movement practice, where the idea of being well-rounded and a jack of all trades appealed to me. So I'd had some weightlifting, classic kind of strength and conditioning for rugby, which was all about getting big, and then also having some cardio to run around on a paddock. But moving towards handstands taught me patience, balance, and also it seemed to correct a lot of the postural difficulties I had from sitting at a desk for 20 years and being quite hunched forward. So the shoulder opening just felt like it was offsetting some of the lifestyle issues that I had developed. It felt like it was straightening me out, and a lot of extension in the body. And I was really attracted to locomotion, I think, because it was like the opposite of me. I was so stiff and tight and linear. And then you've got this weird, organic, free-flowing, hard to describe animal crawling dance, capoeira, martial arty. I couldn't even explain it. But I was captivated by it, the aesthetic of it, the flow of it. And I think because it felt so far removed from what my body could do, yet I was magnetized towards it, knowing that I think my body needs that, the ability to be fluid. And I think there's some metaphor in that for the life I was craving as well, just the ability to flow, but also be strong. I could be rigid, but I can be soft, and I can just choose anywhere in between. So those qualities were really appealing to me, and I just started to build a practice around those.
That's really interesting that you say you were able to choose different states or choose different choices. There's a lovely idea from a guy called Robert Sapolsky. He's the author of Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, and he's like a evolutionary biologist, and he researches stress, basically. And one of his concepts is like building blocks towards stress and fear, and there's certain things that add to fear or stress. And one of those things is lack of choice. If you don't have a choice in a certain situation, it becomes inherently more stressful. And I think it's so true. If you don't have the ability to change not only what you're doing, but how you're doing it, like remodularize your body from this kind of stiff, limited experience of life. And instead you're able to kind of say, well, actually I can relax and I can be malleable and I can express a certain emotion or a movement or dance with my partner in a certain way and not constrain that. I think it's a really empowering way of living and practicing. Did you feel that when you started to work with the more kind of, to use your word, fluid practices?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was fascinated by the subtle qualities of fluidity and flow. And one of the first online teachers is a good friend of yours, Neil Teisner, taught me with his Finding Flow program. So shout out to Neil. And I was so robotic at the time, and he gave me some locomotion, soft acrobatic drills to do. And I guess the frustration was I was putting my hands and feet where he told me, but it looked horrible when I did it. And I'd film myself and I'm like, this is really embarrassing. I'm like a robot. And I would send him the videos and he would say, like, loosen up, soften up, slow down. So then I would exaggerate those qualities to the point where I'm like a wet fish flopping and there's no control. And then he would say, okay, you've gone too far, like tighten up a little. And then he would say something like, we're trying to find this point between chaos and control. There's somewhere in the middle of that. And it's so subtle. That texture is so subtle and you can't get there immediately unless you've had a background in dance or Tai Chi or something. And it was just so fascinating to me that I'm putting my hands and feet in the spots in the correct positions, but it's not happening. I don't. And then layer by layer, by practicing over and over and over, how it starts to reveal itself. And to me, that was just beautiful. That and sometimes you can feel it, that inertia, that momentum, and the way it recycles through your body. And I guess maybe in the Eastern traditions, they would call it chi, or maybe in the yoga traditions, prana. Or you can feel this energy that's there, and it's like, oh, okay. And it's very woo woo, but that's the difference between people that practice it and are flowing, and when you start and you're like this Terminator trying to just get the right hands and get your hands and feet in the right spots. And so that was a beautiful teacher for me. And then I think trying to transcend just from movement, putting that into your life, like realizing that there's more than my job as a lawyer and just being a provider in the eyes of my children and being a good son in the eyes of my parents, that there's these like softer qualities beneath all of that that are connected to the human spirit, which is my spiritual experience of this life, that I needed to soften and flow with life more than just jamming my way through it, ticking boxes. And so I think there was a beautiful kind of connection there, how it transcends just the practice and it starts to work its way into your life and your life choices.
Yeah, I can see that. I think I would actually push back and say it's not woo-woo. I really feel it in like the idea of this kind of whatever you're feeling momentum-wise in movement. And it's the same thing that planets have when they're orbiting. Like angular momentum is something that's like recycling momentum. The only reason that it's harder for us to find is because that we have all these weird body parts and we're not just circular kind of objects that have no issue and have this just giant mass that's pulling them in a circle. But I really think that if you understand the kind of fluidity in like physics terms, I really feel it becomes way more meaningful because it's no longer a woo-woo, oh yeah, it's kind of like this, but also not. It's like, oh no, genuinely, like everything that we literally standing on something that's abiding by this law of physics. It's like, oh, great. So I'm just learning to sense what's truly there, like that principle of science, rather than a woo-woo idea from some guru. And for me, that's such a beautiful thing that Tom Wexler talks about. He's been like a teacher to me and Neil for years, and he really tries to lean into principles rather than kind of ideas in a way. And I think it's
Yeah.
really empowering because it's more, for me at least, as this kind of like young guy before, it was like, oh, I can trust that because it's somehow pragmatic or scientific or grounded, you know? And coming from the West, it's very hard when I was young to lean into like Eastern ideologies or Eastern ideas because, like you say, they're a bit more like woo-woo. But I think, yeah, having some kind of lean towards things that are always going to be their principles, you can't lose. And I think it's so clear to me that moving in ways that are not only, to use your word, Terminator-esque, but also kind of fluid and maybe even looking to be as easy as possible or lazy as possible, and finding that choice, to go back to the start of the conversation, is so vital to regulate yourself in different situations. And when I'm really afraid, for example, I really feel that my body tends towards the kind of Terminator style. I get a bit rigid. I get a bit locked up and over tense, and whether I'm like hyped and excited or completely petrified, it's probably quite similar in my body. And having the ability to understand what it feels like to have the opposite of that is then really powerful because I can start to modulate. Okay, like right now, I feel like I'm just interested in the conversation, so my shoulders are a bit higher than usual, and I can sense that, and now I can breathe and drop my shoulders. And I wonder, through the process of you going from the Terminator style of movement towards this kind of like fluid flowing and the joyous practice that you have now, what kind of tools you've found for yourself, whether it's through the yoga practice or movement, that help almost bring an awareness of yourself, of your physicality, of maybe things that are trending too much towards the Terminator side, and what helps you to come back more towards this kind of flowing and this principled side.
Yeah. I think for me it's been having a mixture in my practice. So you've got the vessel, and we need to do certain things to keep the vessel healthy. And for me, as I've gotten older, it's become less about, I think when you're in your early 20s and you're looking for a mate and you haven't had your kids yet, especially in my younger days anyway, growing up in the 80s and 90s, the bodybuilding scene was exploding. We had Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme. They were all my heroes. And so if you were big and muscular, you would get the hotter girl. That was basically the mental calculation of my 18-year-old brain. So it was all about just trying to get as big and muscular as I could. But then as I get older, I've had children, and that's not as, I don't know, my brain doesn't think like that anymore. So now it's about maintaining what I have, and I want to keep good strength, good muscle tone. So I've got my strength practices that are about maintaining my vessel, but then I've got the skills that I like to improve on, which really cultivate. It's more about this obsession for finding the present moment and spending as much time in that eternal now as I can, because when you're trying to like do a handstand and break the 60-second barrier, and you've spent 2 years building up to that, and it's this relentless pursuit, the amount of time you spend in that space is basically a form of meditation in a sense, or a mindfulness practice where I'm not thinking about other things. My mind is on this task. So there's a singularity of purpose, a single-mindedness to my conscious focus. My awareness is focused on this thing. So it does have physical benefits as well, but really the main benefit is is a spiritual one in a sense, because while I'm there, I'm not drinking liquor, I'm not suffering, I'm not thinking horrible thoughts about other people, my temper isn't flaring, I'm not hurting anybody. So I've kind of got those practices, and locomotion's a bit like that too, where I just really I'm so present and lost in the moment, and it's so joyous for me. It makes me feel so wonderful, because time goes by and I look at my clock and I'm like, oh my God, I've been out here for an hour. I'm meant to be inside cooking dinner or whatever. I just get lost. There's no time there for me. I could be there forever, And so for me, that's the joy in it and the wonder in it, skill-based training, where you can just keep that focus and you're working towards these long-range concepts, skills, but also that sense of flow and that quality of the softness, the softer layers. And there's more and more revealed. The deeper you go, the more you realize you weren't aware that there's even more layers, and it gets more intricate and more detailed. It's like a microscope. It just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. So that for me is a beautiful part of it. And I think it gives you a rich life, because you've got this wonderful world to play in, and it's free.